Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was January 17th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is The Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Part of what's drawn me to this project is the sheer abundance of digitized material from the 14th century Crown of Aragon. That is available on PARES, a website hosted by the Spanish government. Let's begin today's document. Well, it's here, finally, in episode 24, the phrase that is the title of this season of the Historian's Notebook, Multcara Companiona. These are the first three words of this document that we're looking at today that Joan wrote to Violant, updating her about some goings-on with the Barcelona City Council. But Multcara Companiona, which is actually saying it like what it looks like on today's document, could also be exchanged with Multcara Companiona. And Violant doesn't say that back to Joan because cara companiona is gendered. So cara ends with an A because it's addressing, in today's document, it's addressing Violant, a woman. And when Joan writes to his brother and says, Molt car frère, he's not adding the A because in Catalan, like many of the Romance languages, your ending of a adjective will be changed based on either a masculine, feminine, or neuter gender for the noun and the person that you're talking to. It gets a little bit complicated. Like, you notice that molt is actually the same. Molt car frère, molt cara companiona. There's exceptions to the rule, and molt is one of them. Companiona is female companion. And if Joan was writing to a man, would he use the term compagnon? I don't think so, because we've seen instances where, I don't know if we've had a document about it on the podcast yet, but I have seen instances where he will say something like, molt car amigo. I don't know if the word compagnon is actually idiomatic, if it's customary to use it when talking to someone of the masculine gender. All of this discussion of gendered language, it is a great segue into one of the things that has really inspired me to study Joan and Violant, which is the question of how they related to each other, how they negotiated the boundaries of their marriage, and how they negotiated the boundaries of governance, and how those decisions were made according to gendered criteria. So I want to take a step back for a moment and explain a little bit about how historians talk about gender in past societies. There was a period of time, say in the mid-20th century, like 1950s, 1960s, getting into the 1970s. When talking about gender in history, really mostly meant that historians would find the women. They would go find the women of the past and write about them. Because women had been excluded from a lot of the historical conventions of telling history. Women were thought of as less important. And so you could see a reaction to that patriarchal inheritance in the field of history just by going and having more stories about women. But then in 1986, Joan Scott published an article called Gender, a Useful Category of Historical Analysis. And this really shifted a whole lot, especially in the Anglophone world, in the way that historians approached gender. Not just as a project of finding stories of women, but of thinking about how gender relations were also relations of power, and that being seen as a woman or being seen as a man by others would shape what would happen in a particular time and place according to the rules for what a man was supposed to be or what a woman was supposed to be in different places. And then, of course, there are many historical examples of societies who have something that is in between, a gender category that does not fit neatly into man or woman. This is a well-known feature of many human societies. The field of anthropology has well documented it. So if we're looking at Western European societies of the Middle Ages, we're not really seeing much of a recognized alternative between man and woman. However, we are seeing all kinds of examples where women are accused of acting too manly or being too manly. And we're also seeing all kinds of examples of men who are accused of being too womanly. In the realm of culture, we also see an embrace of gender blending and gender bending. The scholar Leah Devon has done some excellent recent work on this for Western Europe, and the scholar Roland Betancourt has done some amazing work on this for Eastern Europe, specifically Byzantine culture. So I'll put their books into the bibliography on the webpage for today's episode. The major thing to keep in mind when talking about gender in past societies, which you've probably already picked up on, is that the expectations and the rules and what counts as normal and what counts as not normal, they change. And a scholar who wrote a breakthrough book in feminist theory really has informed the way that historians talk about gender for both men and women in past societies. And that scholar is Judith Butler, who wrote in 1990 the book Gender Trouble. The key insight from Gender Trouble is that gender is a performance that is constantly reinforced. It is reinforced as an individual makes choices about how they are going to behave or react to situations or what they're going to do today and how they're going to do it, how they're going to say the things that they're going to say. And it's also reinforced through the responses that they're getting from those that they're interacting with, the messages that they're receiving about, oh, wait a second, you just did something that a man is not supposed to do, or you just did something that a woman is not supposed to do. And these conversations are constantly playing out in social interaction on a daily basis, and also you can see them in the cultural products that are produced by the artists of a particular society. And over time, there can be changes, but also over time, there can be continuities. So, tracing out what is different in the set of expectations for manliness in different times and different places, and also even in the same general area at the same time, you can have some shifts. My favorite example of this for Joan is his hunting. One of his favorite activities is hunting. And when I first found out about this, I was a little bit confused, because I also knew from Michael A. Ryan's book that Joan was frequently accused of being too womanly. And those accusations were based on his interests in the arts and music and astrology. Getting too deep into astrology was seen as womanly. And so when I realized that his cognomen, the way that he's referred to in history, is the hunter, Joan the hunter, like Père the ceremonious was his father, and Joan is Joan el Cazador, the hunter. I was really confused. Like, how does this fit together? Like, what's going on here? So I started to research hunting among elites in the Middle Ages, and you really cannot think about hunting in the way that our society does today, especially in some of the militarized hunting culture in 21st century United States hunting culture, because that really interacts with the activity of hunting in a way that is simulating the hyper-masculine culture of the military. But although hunting was seen as like a rehearsal for battle in a lot of contexts in the pre-modern European societies that kind of over the centuries kind of have reinforced that idea, when we get to the Middle Ages, hunting is actually something that could be feminine. There's a really interesting depiction of Maria Magdalene that I was made aware of from an article by the scholar of European pre-modern sexuality, Ruth Mazo-Karras. This depiction of Mary Magdalene, who was seen as a very fallen woman, very bad woman until she met Jesus, and then she reformed her ways. So this image is all about her, erroneous ways, all the things she was doing bad. And there's all these different little scenes in this picture, and one of them is she's out hunting. And that really encapsulated this whole issue for me, which is that according to the gender rules of the Middle Ages, if you were engaged in the luxurious aristocratic style of hunting, and you did that too much, and you leaned into some of the luxury of that experience, you would be seen as too womanly if you were doing that as a man. And if you were a woman going out hunting, you could be seen as too manly. So it was really like, a fine line. So I started to look at a bunch of cases where hunting was seen as masculine and hunting was seen as feminine. You can see these cases in the same time period in very proximate localities. So Joan's hunting was too luxurious, and so it was seen as a feminine activity, fitting right into an overall profile that his contemporary critics fashioned for him as a problem, not being manly enough. So this example is a short one, and there's way more details to work in here about hunting and all the different cases that illustrate what I'm talking about. But in this moment here, suffice it to say that when we're looking at Joan and Violant, we can see the misbehavior, we can see the pushing of the boundaries against what a proper man should be doing and what a proper woman should be doing. Where did Violant get criticized for not being a proper woman? It was her, as the critics saw it, outsized role in politics, in governance. And so what's really interesting to me is to look at Joan and Violant to see how they operated as a team to support each other in the pushing up against the rules for what a man should be doing and what a woman should be doing. And so that's one of the things I'm looking for, but at the same time I'm looking for how their emotional history with each other took place and how it wove into the way that they set up the relationship of the way that they related to each other as king and as queen. And molt cara compagnona, most dear companion, that to me is a really good encapsulation of part of that emotional history. We see Violant referring to Joan as molt car signor, most dear lord. And I'm going to be looking out to see if I can find Violant using an address such as molt car compagnon. That would be interesting. I'm not sure if that happens, but we'll see. So, what's this letter about today? I'm not sure it's terribly important for that larger purpose, the focus that I bring. There's some kind of dispute about the selection of councilors to the Barcelona City Council. Later on down the road, Joan and the Barcelona City Council really do not get along. There's a dramatic moment a few years down the road. I think it's 1394, where Joan wants the city of Barcelona to pay for his next iteration of a fantastic troubadour competition that he's imported from Toulouse. And the city council says, no, we're not paying for that. There's no money for your big troubadour party. And Joan is very mad at them. Very mad. So that's the kind of tension that happens later. But I'm not sure if I'm noticing in this letter today any evidence that there's problems brewing between Joan and the councilors for Barcelona. All right, that brings this episode to a close. Thanks for listening to this installment of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, including a whole bunch of articles connected to history of gender and gender history. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.